Hey everyone, and welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into a really profound framework that originally comes from a 2007 lecture titled Youth and Courage. We're going to be focusing on the deeply intertwined concepts of friendship and resilience. We're going to break down how to actually navigate the absolute maze of youth, how to build genuine, long-lasting friendships without getting hurt in the process, and we'll uncover the true, actionable meaning of courage. So if you've ever struggled with setting boundaries, dealing with peer pressure, or honestly just the fear of failure, the insights we're about to unpack are going to be a real game changer for you.
Right off the bat, the source material sets this incredible tone. Setbacks are a badge of youth. I mean, think about that. Instead of viewing a setback as this permanent, embarrassing mark against your character, we're being challenged to see it as a literal medal of honor. It's proof that you're actually in the arena, you know? You're trying and you're learning. Because courage isn't just some vague, feel good emotion, right? It's the ultimate catalyst that actually dictates our destiny. It gives us the power to toss out all those comfortable, daily excuses we make for ourselves. When you have courage, you can stand up for yourself, you can fight for your future, and, maybe most importantly, you can even reach out a hand to save others. Courage is literally the fuel for life's engine. To really get a grip on this, we'll be exploring 4 key areas today: the art of interpersonal distance, revealing your cards, the courage to say no, and embracing lifelong challenges. Okay, let's jump straight into section 1, the art of distance and interpersonal boundaries. So, the text uses this brilliant analogy. Think of approaching a new relationship like standing at a front door. You wouldn't just barge right in, raid the fridge, and make yourself at home, right? Instead, you want to open the door just a little bit to show you're interested. And then you pause. You observe. How does the other person react to that slightly open door? Do they actually understand you? Are they receptive? Only by paying attention to that can you safely and gradually deepen the connection over time. The whole goal here is finding that optimal interpersonal distance. Because rushing into a super intense, overly attached friendship, it's actually really dangerous. When we rush, we completely skip the essential step of building true mutual understanding. And what happens when two people who don't deeply understand each other get way too close, way too fast? Well, it almost always leads to painful misunderstandings, sudden friction, and ultimately those highly dramatic and hurtful breakups. So maintaining a measured distance early on, it's actually a profound act of care for both of you.
Moving right along to section 2, revealing your cards, where we look at sharing your inner thoughts.
Imagine your inner thoughts and values are like a hand of playing cards. If you rush intimacy, it's essentially like slamming all your absolute strongest, most intense cards on the table on the very first turn. It completely overwhelms the other person, risks alienating them, and usually results in mutual hurt. A measured friendship, on the other hand, means revealing your cards step by step. You play a card, see what card they play in return, and you continuously assess if your values actually align. You've got to check what the other person is holding before you start throwing down your deepest cards. And this is super important because the author points out that the absolute hardest cards to play in any relationship are the ones tied to your deepest core beliefs, your philosophy on life, or your faith. Because those things are so deeply wired into your identity, a rejection of those cards hurts the absolute most. So keeping relationships at a shallower, broader level until you're absolutely sure the foundation is strong enough to handle that depth, that's just a highly intelligent way to protect the integrity of the friendship. Which brings us to section 3, the courage to say no and resisting peer pressure. When peer pressure strikes, and it will, we have to pause and ask ourselves a really hard, honest question. Are they truly your friends if they're pressuring you into doing something you know in your gut is wrong? It sounds simple when we say it out loud, but in the heat of youth and that desperate desire to belong, the lines can get incredibly blurry. The source explicitly calls out these toxic traits. These groups might actually require you to participate in bad acts, like shoplifting or vandalism, as some sort of twisted loyalty test. And if you refuse, they don't just say okay and let it go. They'll label you as arrogant or stuck up and socially exclude you. They might target and bully specific individuals. And honestly, chillingly, they operate a lot like a crime syndicate, multiplying in numbers and sucking more and more passive people into their bad behavior. Look, if a group does this, they are absolutely not real friends. You must have the courage to stand up, tell them they're wrong, and walk away. But how do you actually find the strength to do that? Well, it requires actively learning the universal rules of good and evil. By studying and internalizing what is universally right, you build this solid, unshakable moral compass. And it's that internal compass that gives you the profound courage to stand completely alone and say no, rather than just allowing yourself to be swept away by the sheer numbers of a misguided majority.
Finally, let's dive into Section 4, Embracing Lifelong Challenges and Facing Personal Setbacks. There's this fantastic quote from the text: "Those who fear failure are already old men at heart." Youth isn't just about biological age, it's a state of mind, completely defined by your willingness to challenge the unknown. As long as you're pushing yourself, failure is an absolute given. Fearing that failure simply strips away your youth and vitality regardless of how old you actually are. To put this into a crazy perspective, think about massive, lofty goals, like, say, winning an Olympic gold medal. The failure rate for that is literally 99.9%. The vast majority of people who dedicate their entire lives to that goal will technically fail to get the gold. And what that tells us is that failure is just a natural, totally unavoidable byproduct of high ambition. It's not a sign that you lack worth. If your goals are big enough, failure is just part of the math. In fact, the text beautifully flips this whole concept on its head. It suggests that the absolute greatest failure you can possibly experience in life is having no failures at all. Think about that for a second. If you reach the end of your life with a perfect track record and zero failures, it doesn't mean you were perfect. It just means you only ever attempted things you already knew you could do. It means you never truly challenged yourself or pushed the limits of your own potential. So ultimately, a failure should never ever be seen as a negative endpoint or some final judgment on your capabilities. Instead, it's an essential catalyst. It is the exact friction your soul requires to bloom, to learn, and to take a massive leap forward into whatever you do next. Without the setback, you honestly don't get the setup for the leap. All right, to wrap up this explainer, let's connect all these dots. We've seen that true courage isn't just one single heroic act. It's the vital thread tying all these parts of our lives together. It's the courage to maintain healthy boundaries and not rush intimacy. It's the moral integrity to stand up to toxic friends and say no to bad influences. And for sure, it's the unstoppable personal ambition to keep pushing forward, knowing that setbacks are just stepping stones. So knowing all of this, knowing that keeping a measured distance protects your heart, that universal morals protect your character, and that setbacks are literally just a badge of your youth and ambition, I want to leave you with one final thought. What will you choose to courageously challenge today? Thank you so much for exploring these powerful concepts with me. Keep learning, keep challenging yourself, and I'll catch you in the next one.
Welcome to today's explainer. We're diving into a really profound shift in how we look at failure. If you've ever felt totally paralyzed by a setback, or maybe just trapped by your own overthinking, well, you are definitely in the right place. Today, we're using some incredibly powerful insights from our source material to show you exactly how to transform life's inevitable setbacks into genuine resilience. So let's just jump right in and completely redefine how we view our struggles.
Okay, I want you to answer a simple question for me, just honestly, to yourself. Are you afraid of making mistakes? If you said yes, don't worry, you're completely normal. We all naturally fear stumbling, right? Especially in a world that basically demands perfection. But what if the very thing you dread, that painful misstep, is actually the fundamental requirement for your ultimate growth? Think about it. What if avoiding failure is actually the most dangerous thing you could possibly do for your future?
The source material actually tackles this head-on, boldly declaring, "Don't fear failure. Setbacks are a badge of youth." I absolutely love this framing. We really need to stop fearing failure and instead start looking at our challenges as a badge of honor. A setback, it's not some permanent scar that ruins your record. It's proof that you actually stepped into the arena. It's this necessary friction that helps us grasp something so much greater about ourselves.
All right, moving right into Section 1, the paradigm shift, redefining true ability.
So society usually measures us by these very worldly metrics, right? Things like the environment we grew up in, our academic background, or obviously the amount of money in our bank accounts. But the text challenges this directly. It argues we have to avoid getting trapped by those superficial factors. True life ability? It isn't a flawless resume. It's actually defined by our resilience and the growth of our soul. When you let go of that attachment to worldly values, and say the money fades or a prestigious job title is lost, your true ability is measured strictly by your capacity to just endure and bounce back.
And this actually brings us to a really fascinating paradox. Think about highly educated elites. Someone who graduated top of their class from a prestigious university, walked right into a high-level government or finance job. The text points out that because they have basically never failed, they often lack emotional immunity to setbacks. A single career loss or demotion, it can plunge them into profound despair. On the flip side, someone who has faced harsh, street-level realities, maybe struggling just to find a meal, they develop this incredible, gritty resilience. They build real strength because they've literally been forced to adapt to extreme environments.
To explain this, the text uses this great metaphor. Just as a flounder changes its body color to perfectly match the sand at the bottom of the sea, we too have to develop adaptability. Enduring hardship often requires us to humble ourselves, let go of our past pride, and adapt profoundly to our changing environment. If that elite individual we just talked about acts rigid and refuses to blend into the new, difficult sand of their situation, they just break. The flounder survives because it adapts.
That brings us to Section 2, Finding the Seeds of Happiness.
So, instead of viewing a setback as this purely negative event that you have to avoid at all costs, the source material encourages us to actively search for hidden seeds of happiness floating right there within it. When you fail, there's actually a higher perspective to be found. By looking closely at the failure, you can sense a greater providence, a grander design at work in your life, and it's offering you seeds of wisdom that will bloom later on.
So the crucial takeaway here is this. If you play it entirely safe, successfully dodging every possible failure to maintain a flawless track record, you are actually doing yourself a massive disservice. By avoiding the fall, you're throwing away the absolute greatest chances for your soul to change, to grow, and to reach its highest potential. Enduring sorrow and turning those setbacks into success, the text describes that as the highest, best way to live.
Next up is Section 3, The Trap of the Intellect, Breaking Your Shell.
The source material outlines this remarkably accurate sequence of paralysis that we all kind of fall into. It starts when we gain just a little bit of intelligence and life experience. Step 1, we think we're smart. Step 2, we start over-worrying about minor details and calculating all the risks. Step 3, we engage in self-regulation, basically telling ourselves to just stay in our lane. And finally, Step 4, we hit the trap. We become absolute experts at perfectly and logically explaining exactly why it can't be done. We build this hard shell of rationalizations around ourselves.
And here is the harsh but entirely necessary truth presented in the text. No matter how much you train this ability to make excuses, it is of no use to the world. Seriously, think about that. You might be the most articulate, logical person in the room when it comes to explaining why a project will fail. But that specific intellectual skill, it does absolutely nothing to help you, and it contributes nothing to society.
To break out of this rigid shell of indecision, we have to completely flip the script. We must discard that habit of meticulously listing reasons why something can't be done. Instead, we need to adopt a totally different posture and constantly ask ourselves one simple, incredibly powerful question: how can it be done? Shifting from an excuse maker to a problem solver is the absolute essence of breaking your shell.
Which leads perfectly into Section 4, Courage, the Ultimate Catalyst.
The text states it incredibly plainly. With courage, you can change your destiny. Courage is that fundamental element, the ultimate catalyst required to just toss out your perfectly crafted excuses. It's the fuel that allows you to stand back up after a crushing failure, dust yourself off, and actually step forward to fight for your future, rather than just endlessly theorizing about it.
And what's truly inspiring is that this goes so far beyond just your own life. When you finally muster this courage, when you break your shell and face failure head-on, you realize it holds this profound, radiating power. It doesn't just alter the trajectory of your own destiny. It actually gives you the strength to reach out, extend a hand, and uplift the people around you. Your courage literally becomes a beacon for others who are still trapped in their own shells.
So as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a direct challenge. The next time you face an inevitable setback, you have a choice. Will you retreat into that safe, comfortable shell of perfectly logical excuses, or will you find the hidden seeds of happiness in your struggles, break out of your shell, and find the courage to simply ask, how can it be done? The choice is yours, and it just might change your destiny. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive, and keep pushing forward.
Welcome to today's explainer. We are going to be unpacking a truly fascinating concept drawn directly from Chapter 3 of Ryuho Okawa's insightful book, The Laws of Courage. We're going to explore the absolute secret to maintaining eternal mental youth. It's a concept the author calls the hungry spirit.
Now, if you've ever felt yourself kind of settling into a comfortable routine, or maybe felt that spark of curiosity dimming just a bit as you get older, this analysis is going to completely reframe how you look at aging, learning, and personal growth.
Okay, to kick things off, I want to highlight this incredibly direct, powerful quote from the text that really sets our mindset for today. Never give up means never giving up. Now, I know it sounds super simple, maybe even a bit obvious, right? But the author uses this to hammer home a really vital truth. True youth isn't about biology. It's not about how many years you've been on this earth. It's actually about an unwavering resolve to never surrender to stagnation. It is a conscious, daily decision to just keep pushing forward.
So what exactly does the source material mean by a hungry spirit? We usually associate hunger with, skipping lunch or maybe the ambition of a young professional fresh out of college, but the text completely flips this. It defines it as a relentless psychological drive. It's that persistent, nagging feeling of, I am not full yet, regardless of whether you're in your 40s, 50s, 60s, or beyond. It's the total refusal to accept the status quo, treating every single stage of life as a brand new starting line.
Here is our roadmap for this explainer. We're going to cover the mind-body connection, turning will into habit, moving from school to reading, balancing intensive and extensive reading, and finally, books for repeated reading. Let's dive right in.
First up, the mind-body connection, or how we actually go about fueling that hungry spirit.
You know how in your 20s, your body just kind of works? We have this natural, abundant physical strength, so the mind-body connection is super easy to take for granted. You can pull an all-nighter, study intensely, and just bounce right back. But as we move into our 30s, 40s, and 50s, that effortless energy definitely fades. The text makes it absolutely clear that as adults, we must put in active, conscious effort to train our bodies. Because if you don't actively fight that natural physical decline, your mental decline is going to drag right along with it.
In fact, the author issues a pretty stark warning here. It is incredibly easy for studious, intellectual people to become physically weak simply because they neglect to exercise. But if you let that physical foundation crumble, your intellectual activity will inevitably slow down and eventually just stop altogether. To keep your mind razor sharp, your body absolutely has to be capable of supporting that intellectual weight.
Moving to Section 2, Turn Will into Habit. This is all about automating your growth.
Now, you might be thinking, how on earth do I sustain this grueling balance of physical and mental training for my whole life without totally burning out? Well, relying purely on motivation is a guaranteed recipe for exhaustion. But the text gives us a great playbook for this. It starts with sheer willpower, pushing yourself to start when you really don't want to. That leads to consistent effort, where you're just battling that daily friction. But the magic happens at step 3, habit. The author introduces this brilliant idea of relying on the law of inertia for your own growth. Once that effort becomes an ingrained habit, the struggle literally disappears. It feels effortless. You've basically converted your willpower into an automated system that feeds your hungry spirit on autopilot.
All right, Section 3, From School to Reading, which is really the ultimate form of adult study.
So once we have the physical foundation and those automated habits locked in, how do we actually apply this energy? Well, there's a massive paradigm shift that happens after graduation. Think about it. School study relies on textbooks, cramming for tests, and memorization. But adult study is fundamentally different. It relies entirely on strategic reading. And the text emphasizes a great point here. You don't need to frantically speed read thousands of books a year to be successful. That's a total myth. Adult study is about focused, strategic reading designed to build a lasting intellectual foundation and really expand your personal horizons.
Which brings us nicely to Section 4, intensive and extensive balance, the two main pillars of reading.
To truly master adult study, we need to use two very different but highly complementary approaches. First, you have intensive reading. This is your deep, slow, careful reading to build true expertise in your specific professional field. You have to dig deep to become a pro, right? But on the flip side, there's extensive reading. This is broad, fast, exploratory reading across tons of different genres. Think of it as your radar. It expands your horizons, shifts your mood, and pulls in diverse information from completely outside your usual bubble. Balancing these two is absolutely crucial. The author points out that if you rely purely on extensive reading, just skimming the bunch of light, easy books, your knowledge is going to be terribly shallow. You won't be a true intellectual. But if you only read intensively in one tiny, narrow field, you become really rigid and inflexible.
Balancing both is what allows you to truly digest complex information, keep your curiosity alive, and maintain a remarkably healthy appetite for lifelong learning.
Finally, Section 5, Books for Repeated Reading. This is all about finding the one.
So this actually reveals the true purpose behind all that broad, extensive reading we just talked about. Ultimately, it's a search mechanism. You read widely so your mental antenna can catch a signal. You are actively searching for that one rare, life-changing masterpiece that is genuinely worthy of being revisited over and over again. And the truth is, you simply can't find those masterworks unless you cast a really wide net. When you finally find that special book, an incredibly beautiful, transformative process begins. You read it once, and it resonates deeply, but you don't just stick it back on the shelf. You pick it up again 1 year later, then maybe 2 years later. Over the span of several years, you might read this single book 5 to 10 times. By doing this, the author explains that this profound wisdom slowly permeates your mind. It totally bypasses simple memorization and actually becomes your own flesh and blood. It becomes the very bedrock of your judgment and your character.
So I want to leave you with this provocative question to chew on today as you continue your own journey of growth. Take a hard look at your own goals, look into your future, and ask yourself, what is the single book that will sustain your hungry spirit for an entire lifetime? Keep searching, keep reading, and whatever you do, never, ever give up that hunger.
All right, welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we are jumping right into some incredibly powerful material. We're unpacking the core philosophies from Ryuho Okawa's seminal work, The Laws of Courage. Specifically, we're zoning in on a really transformative lecture from October 20th, 2007. This actually forms the basis of Chapter 4, which is titled Be Passionate Like Fire, and let me tell you, this material promises a massive paradigm shift. We're going to explore what true success actually looks like, how to radically redefine leadership to empower everyone around you, and ultimately, how to live with just an intense, burning passion. So if you've ever felt stuck, or maybe uninspired, or just hungry for a deeper sense of purpose, you're in the right place. Let's dive in.
So what fundamentally divides the successful from the unsuccessful? It's a question we've literally all wrestled with at some point, right? When we look at people who've reached the absolute pinnacle of their fields, it's just so easy to attribute their achievements to, external factors. We think, oh, it must be raw talent, or we assume it's sheer luck, or having the right connections, a fancy education, or maybe just this ruthless ambition. But according to the source material we're looking at today, the answer is actually none of those things. No way. The real dividing line comes down to a complete, foundational shift in your mindset. It's entirely about how you orient your daily existence and where you place your focus. It's an internal revolution before it ever becomes an external victory.
Section 1. The fundamental difference.
Okay, before we can climb the mountain of success, we have to recognize the traps we so often set for ourselves right at the very bottom. The text bluntly lays out a major paradox of achievement here. Self-centered living guarantees failure, while making others happy is the true path to success. Think about this in a real-world context for a second. We've all encountered that one colleague who constantly hoards credit at work. The one who throws others under the bus to climb the ladder and is completely obsessed with their own promotion. Well, eventually, that person loses the team's trust, and their climb just stalls out. The source argues that if you spend your life desperately chasing success solely for your own ego, wealth, or status, you are literally building a trap for yourself. True achievement only unlocks when you pivot your focus outward, when your absolute primary driving force becomes the happiness, growth, and well-being of other people. That's when the doors to genuine, lasting success finally swing wide open.
The text states this with zero ambiguity, saying, as long as you are thinking about yourself, you cannot become happy. Man, it's a tough pill to swallow, isn't it? I really want you to reflect on this for a second. How much of your daily anxiety, your stress, your lingering frustration actually stems from a place of intense self-obsession? We are constantly asking ourselves stuff like, am I getting enough credit? Or do people like me? Or why didn't they reply to my message? The text suggests that this relentless inward focus, this endless loop of worrying about me, is the exact thing blocking our happiness. Breaking free from that self-centered cycle is step 1 on this whole journey. It's all about shifting the spotlight off yourself.
Section 2. The path to becoming a good leader.
So once we actually manage to step outside of our own ego, what happens next? Well, expanding our capacity to accomplish great work requires an entirely new set of tools. The source lays out 3 really vital steps for putting true leadership into practice. First up, stop comparing yourself to others. The text warns that when we compare ourselves to people in similar lanes, we tend to hyper-fixate on their flaws just to make ourselves feel better. And honestly, that just breeds resentment instead of growth. Second, discover your own future within. This one is absolutely crucial. Instead of looking at the person in the next lane and trying to copy their stride, you have to run your own race. You gotta look inward to find your unique purpose. And third, you must actively nurture and develop those around you. A true leader doesn't just push their own talents to the forefront, they identify the unique strengths in others and help them shine, empowering the whole shebang, the entire team.
You see, true leadership requires a broadness of heart. Imagine an expansive, sweeping mountain valley. That's the exact kind of immense tolerance and deep magnanimity the text is describing here. These aren't skills you can just measure on a standardized test. Academic intelligence and technical prowess are one thing, for sure, but real-world leadership demands an expansive, welcoming spirit. You have to be big enough internally to hold the soaring ambitions, the inevitable flaws, and the raw potential of the people you're leading. It requires you to create a vast, supportive space where others feel safe enough to take risks and grow, much like a wide-open landscape that just stretches as far as the eye can see.
Section 3. Prepare for death, have courage.
All right, now we're shifting to a deeper, much more philosophical level to face the ultimate test of our mindset. The text introduces this ancient Buddhist concept, fushakushin myo, which translates to not sparing one's life. Now, I know that sounds incredibly intense, maybe even a little heavy at first glance, but the author's point here is fundamentally about discovering courage. Real, unshakable courage isn't just, drinking coffee out of a mug that says boss and doing power poses in the mirror every morning. It emerges when an individual is completely prepared to face their own mortality. In a modern context, this basically means letting go of your ego's desperate survival instinct. When you finally stop clinging fearfully to your physical safety, your status, and your pride, that's when you become truly fearless.
And this brings us to one of the most chilling yet incredibly liberating questions posed in the text. How should I die? The source reveals a really profound paradox here. It argues that if you want to know what courage is, you shouldn't just ask, how should I live? You literally cannot truly figure out how to live a meaningful life until you deeply, honestly consider how you want it to end. Facing the reality of your ultimate end instantly strips away all the trivial anxieties of daily life. Suddenly, a bitter argument over a parking spot, a delayed email as some minor slight at work, it just doesn't matter anymore. It forces your perspective to snap right into focus on what actually carries weight.
Section 4. Live passionately like fire.
Because contemplating death, as the text brilliantly argues, isn't meant to make you depressed or nihilistic. Not at all. It's actually meant to be the ultimate catalyst for an incredibly vibrant, active life. The concluding vision of this philosophy is pretty simple. Courage changes human destiny. When you realize your time on Earth is strictly limited, when you let go of that ego and focus on elevating others, you ignite a fiery blood within yourself. The text tells us that the world desperately needs people who are active, fearless, and willing to step up. Utopia isn't built by people playing it safe or hiding from the world. It's built by individuals who unlock this fiery courage, sacrifice for the greater good, and passionately drive humanity forward into a much better future.
So, from shedding our limiting self-centeredness to embracing true, expansive leadership, to bravely facing our own end to unlock a fiery courage, we are left with this final lingering thought. What kind of person do you want to be remembered as after you are gone? I really want you to sit with that today. Take this powerful paradigm shift from the source material and actually apply it to your own life, your own daily work, and ultimately, your own legacy. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I really hope these insights spark a fire in you to go out, live passionately, and build the future.
こんにちは。早速ですが、今回は第5章真実の人生を生ききれについて深掘りしていく解説プログラムをお届けします。2008年に説かれた内容なんですが、私たちの日常の価値観を根本からひっくり返すようなすごいパラダイムシフトが提示されているんですよ。では早速見ていきましょう。現代の競争社会って本当に過酷ですよね。私たちって生き残りをかけて戦う孤独な個人だってどこかで思い込んでいませんか？他人は出し抜くべき競争相手で自分の成功は自力で勝ち取るしかないって。でもちょっと想像してみてください。もしこの当たり前だと思っている前提が根底から間違っていたとしたらどうでしょう？今回フォーカスする第5章の目次を見るとわかるんですが、この章ではまさに
その人間は孤独であるっていう常識に正面から切り込んでいるんです。学校では絶対に教えてくれない本当の自分とは何なのか、そして私たちがどう深く結びついているのかっていう霊的な視点からの答えを探っていきましょう。
ここで著者は、普段私たちが陥りがちな唯物的な視点と霊的な視点を比べてみるよう促しています。唯物的な見方だと、自分と他人は完全に切り離された別の存在ですよね。だからこそ嫉妬したり蹴落とし合うような過酷な競争が生まれてしまうんです。でも霊的な視点に立つとどうなるか。実は私たちは共通のコネを持っていて、愛と深いつながりで結ばれているっていうんです。もうアプローチが180度違いますよね。
第5章の要となる宇宙の生命の大樹というセクションに入りましょう。この霊的な世界観を理解するためのすごく力強いメインの比喩が登場します。それがこの巨大な生命の大樹というとても壮大なコンセプトなんです。宇宙全体を一本の巨大な木に例えていて、私たち人間の命はすべてその根っこで一つにつながっていると説明されています。つまり私たちはバラバラに存在しているわけじゃないんですよ。
そうは言っても、私たちはそれぞれ別々の肉体を持っていますよね。だから自分は完全に独立してるって思い込んじゃうんです。でも著者はその肉眼の視点を離れて、霊的な眼差し、つまり真実の人生観で自分自身を見つめ直してみてほしいと強く投げかけています。
これただの思いつきとか詩的な表現じゃないんです。テキストには、実は古来宗教的な世界では宇宙には宇宙樹とでも言うべき大きな木があるという言い伝えがありますと書かれています。北欧神話のユグドラシルとか古代中国の伝承とか、世界中のいろんな神話に出てくるあの木ですね。これが実は宇宙の根本的な真実を突いているというわけなんです。ちょっとその巨大な木の構造を頭の中に思い描いてみてください。地球の命の根っこである一本の巨大な幹があって、それが太い枝に分かれ、さらに細い枝に分かれていく。そして一番最後にその細い枝の先端にたくさんの葉っぱがついていますよね。その一枚一枚の葉っぱが私たち人間の魂、つまり個性を表しているんですよ。さて、人生の伴侶としてのソウルメイトというセクションです。私たち自身がその葉っぱだとすると、同じ細い枝にくっついているすぐ隣の葉っぱたちって一体誰なんでしょうか。ここで登場するのがソウルメイト、つまり魂の兄弟という概念です。一本の小さな枝の先にだいたい6枚くらいの葉っぱが一緒についているのを想像してみてください。これがお互いを支え合うために共に生まれてきたものすごく縁の深い霊的な家族やグループなんです。
ここめちゃくちゃ重要なポイントですよ。あなたの人生で出会う人たちってたまたま通りすがった他人とか出し抜くべきライバルなんかじゃないんです。実は同じ時代に生まれてお互いの人生をサポートし合うために出会うべくして出会った深いつながりを持つ魂の仲間たちなんです。次は真実の人生を生き切るというセクションです。私たちが根本でがっちりつながっているって分かったところで、じゃあこの疲れる競争社会の中でどうやってこの考え方を生かしていけばいいのか見ていきましょう。人を傷つけるってことは、文字通り自分と同じ木に生えている隣の葉っぱをむしり取ろうとしてるのと同じなんですよね。そこに気づくと、極端な個人主義のせいでメラメラ燃えていた嫉妬とか憎しみが不思議とお互いを思いやる愛へと溶けていくんです。まさに競争から調和へ視点がガラッと変わる瞬間ですよね。
この霊的な世界観で生きていくための実践的なポイントがいくつか挙げられています。まず、目に見える物質的なものへの執着を捨てること。そして信仰の優位を受け入れて霊的な視点で世界を見ること。さらにこの後お話しする代償の法則をしっかり信じることなんです。
この代償の法則っていうのは本当に心強い考え方です。これだけ深くつながった生命の大事の中では、あなたが誰かに与えた愛とかコツコツやった誠実な努力って絶対に無駄にならないんですよ。たとえ今すぐこの世界で評価されなくても、それは大地全体に栄養を与えていて、必ずどこかで一番いい形であなたに返ってくるっていう法則なんです。
さて、最後に皆さんへちょっとした問いかけをしてこの解説を締めくくろうと思います。もし今日あなたが霊的な目で世界を見て、私たち全員が同じ一本の木の根っこを共有していると心から信じたとしたら、今日これからあなたが次に出会う人への接し方ってどう変わると思いますか？
ぜひこの壮大なスケールの視点を日常に少しだけ取り入れてみてくださいね。